Hi, this is Vaughan in Nova Scotia at westcoatbellpottery.ca. I'm going to do a technique I've been asked to show, stenciling and masking out. I've explained it a few times, but it's hand painted basically in a sort of a sort of primitive type of way, but it's still hand painting. So here's how we do it. I've just fed my cat. There's good. Anyway, here's my stencils. They're little houses, and there's a few cows there. There are some trees. Here is the paper and the mat that I cut out of. So it's basically just whatever paper you can find that isn't shiny and isn't too easy to break down in water. And that's not so easy any longer because basically paper's meant to break down these days. I collected telephone books back in the 1980s before they became a problem in recycled in dumps basically. So I have enough for me to last a long time. But anyway, you have to hand cut all this paper, and I use an X-Acto knife and a mat board here to do so the shapes that are very intricate. If you have a simple shape, you might be able to I mean, you might even be today. You might even find machines that do this, cut stencils. I'm not sure. I haven't done that. I still cut by hand using a mat board and an X-Acto knife. You can see the pieces of paper there where I cut out a little house shape and such. But anyway, the stencils take hours to cut first, but that's what you have to do. You know, if you're going to do stenciling. Image-wise, you can do anything. You could do abstracts. I did some abstracts years ago just to try it, you can come up with any imagery that you like: insects, birds, animals, whatever. These ones, I used to sell this design. I've been doing this since the early 80s, and I've been selling it. I was when I lived in the United States to the Folk Art Museum in Manhattan. We had an account there, and they used to give me a show every year in the window on Lincoln Center. But anyway, basically just I'll give you a quick demo of putting stencils on. Let's see if I can get you a bit closer. There we go. So I have these trees, and you can see these are hard to cut out, but you place it where you want it to be. Is this showing up? Yep, it is. Let's see if I can raise this a touch. And you have to put them on. Try and get them where I dip them in water. And I'm going to have to add water in a minute, but the tree I didn't dip because it's too floppy. I have a couple of little cows here. Now, I've done this technique for 40 years. I designed some pieces for a greyhound trophy in England, in Kent. So somebody has that, I assume. In 1983, all right? Can you see that? Yeah, you can. So I got my paper in there, and then you have to brush it in. I sort of scrub the brush around, so you need a stiffish brush to do this, not something that's soft. And so you've got to be careful not to move the paper. And this gets really hard later on when you've got colors in there. But you've got to place it on so it doesn't slip around, and then basically brush it in. And I try and brush the outside color of clay over the paper so I know that I've actually brushed all the areas in. Otherwise you'll get creases and bleeding when you add the next layer of color. All right, so you can see it's almost disappeared. And this piece is soft. This is done when the clay is really, I threw them an hour or two ago, so they're very soft still, especially since it's raining today. And humidity slows this process down a lot because you have to add color next and then basically let it dry for hours. You know, could be depending on the humidity. So that's step one. Okay, step two. I've got my bowl. About 10 minutes later, the water is all sort of soaked into the clay, but the paper is in there. You can barely see it, I know where it is. I have a light here to try and help me during this process because it is easy to lose things. Remember, you've got to know how many pieces of paper are down for each layer. All right, then you get some slip and a really soft brush, and you paint wherever you want to have something that's a different color. I've got blue here as well. I think that's all I'm going to put on this. So basically now I have to wait for that to dry, which can take, in a dry day, an hour, in a humid day, a day. So that's basically part of this technique. It just takes a long time. All right, so that's what it looks like. I got two areas of wet slip that I now just have to wait for them to dry. This is about an hour later because these pieces are drying a little faster than I thought. So we have about an hour later. The yellow and the blue is now matte, so it's not shiny at all. I've got some fresh water. Let's tilt you down a bit. All right, so fresh water and some more pieces of paper. I'm going to put another house, a couple more houses on these actually. Okay, so you simply dip them in water, wait for about 10 seconds so the paper soaks in the water. Place it where you want it to go. Get a different piece of paper, whatever you're using. Drip the water off. The water has to absorb into the paper so it expands. You don't want it to expand on the piece, it will cause a crease. And then taking a clean paintbrush too. So I've got two pots of water here, one with the brown clay in it and one with the fresh water. So I'm just basically cleaning my brush, get some fresh water, and then brush in your piece of paper so that, like I said, the color has to go over the actual paper. Clean your brush a little bit because I'm going to a different color here. And brush in that piece of paper so that you don't see any creases. If it starts to crease up, you're in trouble. And then it's a pain in the neck to have to do this. You've got to brush away the yellow because it will show through the next layer of slip, even if not the next one, the one after that. So you try and smooth out the clay. Just a touch of water so you don't make the stencil move, and you brush away what extra color you have there that's showing up. So only left is the stuff that's underneath, and that's because later on when you do the different layers, basically you'll see a little outline of where the slip was painted. You don't want that. Then, because of what I'm doing, I'm putting little roofs in over the houses now. So I've got some black underglaze, and I paint it randomly where I think the roof line is going to be. And I had a brown house down before. Trying not to leave brush strokes. All right, I think I can see a little brush strokes there. So That's why you don't use very much water on the sponge, because you've got water on the surface and it will dilute the next layer of black here. There you go. Now in addition, I had some cows in the bottom there. I'm going to give myself a little black area on the other area to paint a few black cows. So I had brown cows before. So I've got all that black painted in there. All right, so basically that has to dry again. So maybe another hour. Already. All right, next step. All right, this is my black drying. And now it gets really tough. It depends on your design. Maybe yours gets easier. I have to see what I already have. And then now I'm placing the little pieces of paper that represent the roofs of the building that I already have down. It gets fiddly at this point, and I used to have employees in many years ago, and some people just couldn't do this, and I'm having trouble now. It's about placing that piece of paper right in the correct place. So you've got to know which stencil has to go where, which roof line for which house, etc. And then you can use a pair of tweezers if your fingers are just not sensitive enough to hold it. And just place it, you see, yep, okay, so, and then I have my two cows in brown there, so I'm going to add a couple of black cows behind them. As I said, this technique is so tedious that I honestly feel like, you know, I mean, just don't even try to do this. I love doing other types of pottery now, but I developed this technique years ago. In the 1980s I was doing it, and I was selling it, like I said, to the Museum of American Folk Art, and they used to give me a window display on 2 Lincoln Square, Lincoln Center basically, in Manhattan, every year to display these pieces. And we did that for going on 20 odd years, I think. I remember the lady's name, Marie DeMano. There was a lady who used to run that shop on the museum. I wonder, hi Marie, if you're still around. There we go. So now it's got a brown layer, there's a yellow, a blue, and now there's a black layer. There's 2 more layers to go, which is why I'm saying this is very time consuming. I have a big brush with some green on here. So let's see if I can get this to spin properly. This is a Lazy Susan that's plastic, it's not the best banding wheel. Probably I should have run that black down a little bit. We'll see where that haunts me later on. But there's 2 layers here over the top, so I think it might be all right. The black is a very thin layer anyway. Now see how it's running a little bit? Because I wet this brush first before I put the green on, and that always, the water sort of hangs about in the brush a little bit, so you've got to make sure that you don't. Okay, so I have 2 layers of green on there. All right. And now I've got to wait for that to dry again. And today it's taken about an hour between layers to dry. So it's not bad. And it is raining out there. So, all right. Okay, this is either step 4 or 5. Losing count still. I'm down to the tree stencils, which I have there. I got the roofs on. That was very tedious. Now, I cannot see at this point, I got my green on, it's dried. it's very difficult to see all the stencils. There's a very slight outline to some of them, so you've got to remember where you're putting stuff. You need to either photograph it. Everybody has cell phones today. I guess that could be a useful tool here. Let's get this a bit closer so you can see. All right, put the light there so you can see a bit better. Keep your hands totally clean. One thing, I make my own nightmare here a little bit by having two cats next to me all the time, because if they lose fur and it gets on the stencil, it leaves a black line, and so I have to be very careful. A tree. I place it down. A hedgerow. I'm dipping them in water, placing them down, not going fast. I'm trying to let the paper have time to absorb water so it doesn't wrinkle. Let's see if I've got some pine trees here. Yes, I do have some pine trees. I cut stencils, and I always cut more than I need because I always figure I'll need it later. So I have stencils sometimes that I cut years ago. Okay, there's a very tall tree. And you've got to be careful where you place it so it doesn't actually go below something that you already have. Otherwise, you'll see that. It's hard to explain, but you'll end up with floating trees. There's another apple tree. So I'm always placing them just a bit above whatever stencil they're overlapping. Here's a row of pine trees. We used to cut out paper as kids by folding paper, so you could get duplicates of something. That might be a useful tool here as well. When I used to do this years ago, I used to get my mother. She was retired, and she used to cut paper stencils for me. She can't do that anymore because she is 93 years old now. There we go. There you go. So then I rub them in, just like we've done before. There's some water run down into the middle of the bowl, so I don't want that to build up, so I'm using it as a little reservoir to catch so I can get my brush wet again. And you've got to try and scrub to make sure there's no wrinkles, no little bleeding areas. Otherwise, the slip will run underneath the piece of paper, and that will, like any illustration, I mean, that's the problem here. We're illustrating. So you can't, in functional stoneware pottery, you can have happy accidents that look really better than you thought it would ever look, you know, and so that's why you call them happy accidents. But in this kind of a technique, if it's a mistake, you throw it out. It's basically a second. It's like an illustration. And so basically you can't have a mistake. And I noticed that years ago, that you just can't make mistakes with this type of technique. Okay, so there you go. If you can barely see them, I'm sure I'll look later when I look over the video, but the paper is on there. So now, just like I did this green, I'm going to get a light pale green and a blue, and I'll paint that next, and I'll show you. Back again. This is the last step of the painting, although it'll be done in 2 stages. Contradiction. Anyway, I'm just painting the sky on now. Pooh Bell woke up and turned around while you were away. Okay, so basically, get it centered. This is my light blue slip. This wheel, banding wheel, is very old, so it wobbles a little bit. Okay, I put a base coat on, make sure it doesn't dribble. And then, because I put trees in different places on these, I can sort of, you're painting basically, so you've got to be above the tree line. Okay, so that's the basic shape. I'll have to do probably 2 gentle coats of this. So then I can come down. So you don't want to leave brush marks, remember. Okay, so I'm just going to let that dry, and I've still got to do the green in the center. Okay, so now we have to do the green in the center. Now you can't let the slip build up in the center of a ball because it tends to get too thick and it might actually crack if it gets thick. This banding wheel really wobbling. And you can really go to town and brush around a lot with something like this because, you know, landscape has patterns in it with fields and stuff. So I don't see any problem in having a little brush marks in the ground itself where the green is. Okay, so that was a little watery. So I've got to wait now for this to dry. Now you can, you know, if you have the ability to do it, you can actually do airbrushing on things like this as well, but you have to build yourself a spray booth and have filters in it and do all the precautions so that nothing goes outside. So that's another way of speeding, but that's if you're going to really speed things up and do things fast, but that's a whole other ball game if you do airbrushing. So but anyway, that's got to dry now for a little while. Now we're going to try and do a second coat and get rid of any kind of lines that may be hanging around in there. So it's really kind of just, it's hard because you're trying to anticipate where the hill goes up and down. And then with the brush barely touching the surface, and in the past I've put a little blue area in the center where it actually makes it look like a pool, a pond. There you go. So it's pretty even coat basically. I could do another coat of the blue. Not sure if this has got enough left on it. Paint some clouds in there too. Oops, I made that worse. Get a bit more blue on the brush, I guess, anyway. But you get the general idea, and that's the end of the layering. So this is an hour and a half later. They have been drying, but it's a very humid day, so they're still pretty soft. And this is where I do some painting while I'm basically waiting for the rest of the stencil. Brushes here, they're fan brushes, so I just kind of give a little. Art is very, very hard because you have got to find the pieces of paper, and I just finished these, remember, so I have good memory that I can remember these. Let's see if you can do it where you can see it. So this is, I know there's a tree there, and you can't press hard, otherwise you'll make a mark in the clay. So you're just peeling off the tree shape. So I try to push this X-Acto blade in sideways till it catches the edge of the paper, and then very gently, and use 2 hands. If there's any chance this falls in, it will stick. Now I designed these pieces back in the 1980s, and like I said, I used to sell them to the New York, well, it's called the Museum of American Folk Art in New York, 2 Lincoln Square rather. So if you go on eBay, you will find some of my old pieces, because I see them every so often being sold on eBay. And even on auctioneer sites, I can't remember what it's called, something auctioneers, we find some of these pieces coming up. Way back. And if you find any, you'll see how we developed the technique over the years. Okay, so that's got all the trees removed. Now I go for the rooftops. If I left these overnight till tomorrow, I could probably still get them off, but the clay firms up. And as the clay firms up, it is harder to remove the paper. The paper will tear. And there's one more house in here somewhere. Where is it? Well, if I don't see it, then I go back and start picking the other pieces of paper that I can see. I have to leave the body of the house on here. Because I have to paint the windows in. It's not a disaster if I take the windows off, the house off, but it's nice if you can still see it. There's the brown tree. Remember, I had a brown house, a brown tree, and 2 brown cows. And I tried to do them in such a way that here, like a triangle, there, and I think I can see the brown house now. Yes, I can. And the reason I couldn't is I didn't put the rooftop on it. So that's why I keep a paintbrush. Because it's easy to forget something. And I can see the rooftop just there, so I'm going to press it back down. And I simply paint in a roof shape. So it's really easy to forget something when you've got, I don't know how many little pieces of paper I put down during this project. All right, so we've got a little roof painted in there now. So then I can, well, no, I'm going to paint the windows. So I need my yellow underglaze. Here you go, I've got Duncan Cover Coat. And that's an underglaze that goes on greenware. Don't mix it up with the other one. One is called CC and one's called CN. This is CC. And cover coats can actually go on greenware. If you mix it up with the other one, we've actually had problems where it flakes off again. So, and that's a problem with this technique in general. So the windows, there you go. And the same with the rest now. And that one I didn't take all the windows, paint all the windows in, so I'm gonna have to go back and do that again. It's easier if the paper's still there, but if you pick a piece of paper off and you see you missed a window, you just go and paint it in. And like I said, with the doors, I always put little windows in the doors. Like that, and then basically just do this carefully as you can. There's one more door to paint. I think I'll use a smaller paintbrush for this one. And I've got the roof light paint in there as well. Okay, I'm still looking for the cows. Okay, there's a cow right there. So I have 2 black cows and 2 brown cows. When you can't find a stencil, it's a problem because it will ruin the piece. So you just have to be careful. And just keep notes. You guys all have cell phones now. Just take a picture when you're doing it. And there should be one more right next to it. Okay, so we have all the stencils removed. I've got a little touch-up to do basically, because the you know, you always have little things that you do that you'll make a little nick somewhere, whatever. But now I'm going to paint a few sheep. I even paint apples in the apple trees sometimes. But these pieces get so time consuming that you just already can't make your money from them. So anything that has detail in it, you're really looking at price going up dramatically. So you have to think about what you can sell something for and how much work you want to put into it. Down here I can paint a couple as well. And remember, you know, as a painter, I mean, my degree is in fine art, so you have to be able to paint, obviously, and put things in some sort of perspective. And make sure that you've got a balance. Now the doors, we still haven't finished with the painting. It's kind of hard to, let's get that brush a little bit, there's too much color on it. I'll turn the ball around so you can see what I'm putting. The crisscrosses in the windows. So you have to wait till the yellow dries. And go back to that one doorway where the black was still a little wet. So as these dry later on, you can go back in and touch things up. All right. Oh, Mr. House. Okay, so we got all that, and then I got to paint. Let's see if I've got my favorite paintbrush for the. There's one I use for. That's not it. Oh, here it is. I think. Yeah, there it is. To paint the legs on the sheep. It's just a tiny little paintbrush, basically. move that out of the way a little bit. Now, I grew up around sheep. I'm from Yorkshire in England. But even I know that you can't really spend too much time painting something, so it doesn't look totally realistic, but it does have enough that people find recognizable to say, okay, that's a sheep. It's always hard with something that you're painting to actually show what you're painting while you're actually videotaping it, because your hand's in the way. Now, I have made 8 of these large balls and 12 of the smaller balls, so I've got 20 pieces here. And I threw them yesterday afternoon, so I have about an hour and a half into them yesterday, and I've been working on these all day today, and it's now 3:30 coming up. Oops, you gotta be careful, they're soft. So you can see that it's gonna take me way into tomorrow to actually paint all of these. And I'm doing this a little rushed because it's not wet, it's not dry enough where I should be really doing this. Okay, do we have enough in there to say that that's ready? Yep, okay. Oh, one more to go. Okay, all right. So there you got it. Somebody was asking about this, several people, so that gives you the basic technique. Now I'm just going to remind you that everything on here has to be cut out of paper, so that's a large amount of time just in cutting your paper stencils, and you should use things that you're familiar with yourself and images that you find about you, basically. If you leave a piece of paper on this, it's toast. You know, it will. You'd have to take a chisel to it after the firing, and your bowl will, you know, it's pretty much ruined because you'll never make it. So it's perfect. Also, it's dangerous because if you leave a piece of paper on, you forget about it. It doesn't show up in the firing, and then you glaze the piece and you fire it. That piece of paper is going to be like an air bubble under the color. When you sell the piece, it's likely to come off in somebody's food if they put hot food in the bowl. So this is a very dangerous, potential dangerous thing for pottery. So you really have to be absolutely sure if you do anything like this kind of technique that you don't leave paper on, and you know, just be ultra careful. But the basic technique is there. So all right, okay. Go look for my pieces on eBay, see what you find, or something auctioneers is the other site where I see things coming up. All right, thanks very much.